Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And this is a part 2 of a generational archetype conversation we started with our good friend and art director, media producer, Christian Rivera. He's been on the show on the last episode talking about, along with us, myself and Antonia, generations, the archetypes of generations. Your generational cohort, the year you were born, dictates the type of people you grew up around and informs so much about our world. We were talking about that on the last episode. If you haven't been able to listen to that or watch that, it's really great. You should go back and review that, because what we're going to talk about on today's episode is going to build on those concepts. With this long interview, we decided to split into 2 parts. And in the second part, we're going to talk about more of the practical applications of understanding generations and generational theory.
Yeah. And we hope you enjoy part 2 of this episode.
So let's get into it.
So we talked about media and communication,
Sure.
Gen Xers, cobbling stuff together, trying to make things work, trying to be the fixer. I think Neil Howe said that Gen X is like the fixer generation. There was this one YouTube video I saw of someone explaining generational theory. He was a Gen Xer. And by the end, he was like, he felt this sense of purpose. Like there's a park down the street that has a broken swing. And he's like, I'm a fixer. I'm a mechanic. And like afterwards, he grabbed his tools and he went and he's like, let me go fix that. And it's such a minor example, but like we're working on a lot of inner work things to help people calibrate to live their best life, find a sense of meaning and purpose.
Yeah.
And that to me is like fixing, not in the sense that people are broken, whatever.
But or hacking though,
or
helping
hacking.
them hack a better way.
Hack a better way, hacking your life, to find a shortcut or a warp whistle if you're a Super Mario Brothers fan, And so I think each generation has a version of what they're preparing to do.
Sure.
I think for baby boomers, they're collecting resources, and maybe not maybe these things are not happening on purpose, but they're sort of happening by proxy, and they will contribute. So it's the idea that boomers are hoarding resources and collecting resources based on the fact that they did have this track to get through college and a lot of things were relatively, I don't want to make a value judgment here, but I'm saying like they had the opportunity to collect those resources.
Straightforward.
Pretty straightforward. They continue to do so. But because they're so anti-establishment, because they care about the culture, they're very judgmental of millennials creating flatland all the time, thinking about a future that's kind of vague, honestly, if you really put it all on paper. Like we don't really know what it is yet. I think baby boomers are holding on to the resources so that when it does come time where we need money, like as a nation, we're going to need money distributed and passed through all facets of the nation.
Yeah.
Baby boomers are going to say, okay, great. Yeah, we'll give you our money. We'll actually make the sacrifice, because they were willing to make sacrifices for their parents, their GI parents. When they asked for it and said, kid, we went to war, like boomers were like, yeah, that makes sense. And it's kind of the same idea. Once millennials step up and Gen Xers step up to be a part of this coming crisis, baby boomers are going to be like, okay, great. However, we're going to exchange our money for the culture.
Right. Influence.
We want to set the values. So they're listening. They're watching the news. They're paying attention to what millennials are saying. They're paying attention to what Gen X is saying, which is probably why you guys care about the media so much, because they're watching. Your parents are watching.
Yeah.
Right. And what messages get communicated are going to be determined, with everyone's influence, but ultimately by the people who have the gold make the rules, right? And in a sense, that's what they're trying to define, is what the next high and the next bit of culture is going to look like. And that's what Neil talks about in the book. So I think that's pretty interesting. Do you think that corroborates with what you're seeing?
When I read that, I thought that was, like he was talking about the hoarding of the resource, and it was going to be basically asked of them to sacrifice, and they'll say yes. And he also mentioned that in previous saculums, it goes back and forth whether or not it's a prophet or a nomad that ends up being one of the most influential.
The gray champion is what he calls it.
The gray champ. That's right. Like in the Revolutionary War, if I'm not mistaken, those were nomads. In the Revolutionary War, it was actually the nomads that ended up becoming the most influential.
FDR was a nomad?
I believe so, yeah, during World War II. But in the Civil War, I think it was prophets.
Yeah.
And so it kind of it's either a prophet or a nomad, but which is really fascinating. It'll be an older nomad or a younger prophet, most likely.
Yep.
Right. Like, so right now we're like seeing in the news people like RFK Jr.
Yeah.
who would be a younger prophet,
Yep.
right? And it's like it's sort of somebody in that age bracket
Right.
that probably will be the big, and they're going to trade what they have to offer for the influence.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was thinking about when you talk about the Revolutionary War here in the United States, there's a generation that's like fighting and arguing and doing all the logistics, like the legality of it and the warring of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you have an older person, Benjamin Franklin,
Mhm.
on a ship over in Europe, making alliances with France and other
Mhm.
countries to try to shore up. And it really, there's a lot of that was the hero that was unspoken. Like a lot of that actually made the difference. It was
Yeah.
more of the diplomacy that was happening outside the war on the ground, as an example. I think that
I
that
think it was a
gray
prophet,
hero is what you're talking
wasn't he?
about,
Right.
right?
It's the
Yeah.
values. It's sort of the negotiation of the
Mhm.
values
Yeah.
and the negotiation of the
Mhm.
big like there's a whole section with FDR talking about all of the things put in place around that time period, all of the the declarations, for lack of a better word, that were put in place during that time period. A lot of change happens very quickly, but
Mhm.
permanently over the next
Sure.
that will last over the next 80 years will happen in that short time period.
Yeah.
That's why like there's a lot of questions of like why didn't a lot of changes happen after 9/11? We weren't necessarily primed for that. People weren't in the right positions to make those roles, to make those things happen.
Yeah.
Whereas this coming crisis, it's like we're going to be making the changes we need to make. We're going to be willing to make those changes we need to make or keep things in place that we need to keep in place. And it's all going to happen like
Super fast.
very fast.
So fast.
Okay. So let's find I mean, you're on a run right now. I don't want to distract, but I
Mhm.
want to come back to like access points for generations. So before we
Yeah.
move on to the next one, can we talk about boomers for a
Sure.
second?
Yeah.
So I think the generation above them, the older artist archetypes,
Mhm.
this is our silent generation represented of people over the age of like 78, 80.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, there's not much action access for them. We have some wisdom to gain, but the generation will like, it's going to complete soon, either through retirement or passing, like literally death
Right.
will make that generation complete.
Yep.
And so I don't know if there's a lot of action except tie up loose ends, make sure you spend time with your grandkids, retire well, end your life well, I think is really what somebody
The
at
action is kind of a letting go.
yeah,
Mhm.
in a
at
sense.
86, 87, what else can you do, right? And that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And I'm going to face that in my own life someday.
And he talks about how those the artist generation brings friendliness and warmth.
Yeah.
And so one thing that I think that a person of the silent generation can bring is, like you said, spend time with your grandkids, spend time with your families, be
Mhm.
warm, like
Mhm.
provide a warmth and a hearth like feeling, because you went through a crisis as a child. You lived through the secular crisis when you were a kid,
Yeah.
and they might need some of that strength and like the ability to get through
Yeah.
and understand how like
Mhm.
we can do this.
Yeah. Like I could think of a guy, a person, man or woman, 85-year-old person in London.
Mhm.
Hey, I had to wear masks when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Because of gas attacks from the Germans
Right.
bombing us. I
Right.
remember
Yeah.
in like
I remember this.
1943 having to wear a gas mask. I know
Yeah.
what
Right.
it's like. It sucks,
Mhm.
right? To the
Yeah.
kids that are younger now.
Right.
So that generation, I don't know if there's a lot of access point, but I would say the boomers, the prophet archetype generation of boomers.
Mhm.
Let's talk a little about what the access point is there. What I see from boomers is kind of that hoarding of resource, but also really hoping that the coming crisis can just be avoided. Like it won't
Mhm.
actually happen.
Yeah.
Like maybe if we could just get the values in place enough, like if we can
Yes.
just, a conservative, maybe a Christian conservative might say, if we just bring the nation back to God, we don't have to go through the crisis. Or maybe
Right.
somebody else, that older boomer would say, we only get the progressive values in, then we won't have the crisis. Like whatever their
Mhm.
prophetic
If we
answer
could
is.
just get socialism in, or
Yeah,
if we
or
could just get
whatever-
whatever
Yeah,
in.
Christianity in, or whatever,
Yeah.
communism, whatever their, menu of choices on
Yeah.
all sides of their perspectives.
Yeah.
'Cause it's more the energy of the prophet, not the specific topic.
Yeah.
It feels like that's really what they think is going to be the solution.
And it seems like finding more opportunities to almost like gather around the table with other perspectives and get a well-rounded vision of what like future culture could actually look like, and not just like a one-sided perspective of it.
Go back to media though. The problem is, like, it's really hard to get my parents to come off of the cable news channels. They're better than most, but get them on X.
Yep.
Formerly known as Twitter. Or get them on another format where like we can get real, more quicker, citizen journalism type stuff. They're still in legacy media frameworks, even though they don't have an actual cable subscription.
Yeah.
They're still going to their cable channels on their apps and things to watch it, traditional media, and it matters to them.
And I
Like, it
think there's
matters.
this I think I suspect there's a little bit of an underlying, like Gen X won't admit this, but I think there's an underlying motivation there for having influence in
Yeah.
the media,
Yes.
because there is a care about the truth. There's a care about communicating ideas that are full,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word, like complete thoughts.
Won't Gen X admit?
That
We
that
like legacy
potentially
media.
part of the motivation is so that the boomers will see something of higher quality or
Oh, I
higher
see.
value
Oh,
that's not so
absolutely.
one-sided.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely. I think Xers on TV right now that are like in the hosting positions
Mhm.
right,
are trying to kind of bring the ethos, but they're limited by the frameworks they're in.
right. I think literally right now, if we were to stop everything and say, okay, boomers define the values, like we're not there yet.
Yeah.
Like it would be a one side versus the other side,
Mhm.
not really an integration.
Yeah.
Right, because we haven't hit the crisis that brings us
Because
all
we
together.
haven't hit the constellation that brings it all together,
Mhm.
that brings everything to the forefront.
Mhm.
And I think there's been this casting forward of that since they were kids. Like my wife Molly showed me a clip of kids in 1966 talking about like what the year 2000 is going to look like. Most of the answers were relative to nuclear war.
Mhm.
As much as the high created an opportunity for them to roam free and have fun and play and do anything they wanted, you also had a lot of time to think and a lot of
Yeah.
time to absorb all of the underneath stuff of
Yeah.
the fears of nuclear war and what the future is going to look like. So there's a lot of concern about what all of it's going to amount to, which is why they care about the values so much. Because it's
Mhm.
like, if we dial in the values right now, it just happens to be one side or the other side.
Yeah.
But if we dial in the values, we can get our act together and we can actually have a future that's better than nuclear war. Or, and I think Neil Howe said something like, if there's a asteroid that's coming in 2029 that's going to get pretty close, it's not going to hit, but
Mhm.
there's like this almost this underlying desire from some baby boomers to like, I kind of want it to hit,
Right.
and I kind of just want to watch it burn.
Right.
There's like almost like the manifesting of
Mhm.
like, it's like when you have a fear and you kind of want the fear to manifest so you could say, I told you,
Deal with it. Yeah.
Or get over it.
or get over it, or
Mhm.
like it's inevitable, it's going to happen.
Well, even Howe talks about how the next saculum could be nuclear war, and I'm like, it's so interesting that he as a baby boomer is still like,
That still leaks in there.
it still leaks in there, even though
Uh-huh.
he's seeing this as a meta perspective. He's still like, and it could be nuclear war.
Right.
And I'm like, well, it's
Yeah.
more likely to be a bunch
So
of other stuff, but
And I
maybe.
learned that basically that there's a lot more fear driving it than I realized.
Mhm.
There's a lot more fear of
Boomers from boomers.
boomers
Mhm.
driving their perception of what things are going to amount to and what they're going to look like, to the point where like you can almost conflate like a spiritual connection with dissociation of the
Mhm.
fear,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm seeing for baby boomers, like hoarding the resources. Like it's almost like creating a bunker for themselves because they still believe that a nuclear war is going to break out, which I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
it will or not.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That
yeah.
makes sense. Okay. So I guess an action step for boomers then, like I keep encouraging my parents, like, don't just watch legacy media.
Yep.
And my parents are different because they're very counterculture in their own way, more traditional counterculture, because they're not progressive. They kind of go more conservative counterculture, but they're still countercultural in that fashion.
Yeah.
But and they're starting to like come on to X and like look at more new media and stuff. And I
Yeah.
share things with them, like texting and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
to try to encourage them to look at this clip, look at this video, because they have like it's like a very, like the messaging is kind of like from a distance. It's like you're observing and watching it. And like
Yeah.
Gen X media to me and in millennial media is like way more hands on, like boots on the ground. You're like
We're in the
looking at the
dirt,
actual
yeah.
thing. So I guess the access point, I would say one of the actions or access points is get a little bit more familiar and comfortable with things that are outside of legacy media. Get
Mhm.
your sources of information from other places. Now, everybody's going to tell you that's bad and wrong. You're following misinformation and you're, not hearing the truth. But like, I mean, come on. Do we really believe the cable news channels that are,
Well,
it's been pretty much proven they're driven by the government and CIA and stuff like that, they have the right end of it all? Come on.
it really feels commiserate to me to the growth path of someone who's using introverted intuition
Yeah.
from like a young age, that you could develop a lot of paranoia, or if it's lower
Mhm.
down in the car model, you could develop a lot of paranoia about what the future is going to look like and have a lot of uncertainty there. But really the growth there is getting more perspectives, like not just not just relying on
Yep.
your own vision of what the nuclear war or what the future is going to look like, but getting other perspectives of how things are starting to unfold and what reality looks like.
Mhm.
And then from there, once it's time to set those values, you are someone that can actually be pretty well informed to know where you're going to invest your money and how you're going to invest that money, and know that the cultural values are going to be honored going forward.
Yeah.
So I think we can move on to talking about millennials, because we talked about Gen X a little bit here, and those two, there's a little bit of hand in hand. Like with Gen X kind of being in the middle here, it feels like Gen X just kind of ekes into all of it. But I think with millennials, as we start to kind of bring this home,
Yeah. Well, I would just say, I will apologize there. I think Gen X, the action step is
oh yeah,
we have to be willing to step into leadership.
Mhm.
yes,
Like we're still avoidant of stepping up in a leadership fashion, I think, in a lot of ways. Just want to go do it on our own. I'll go start
Yeah.
my tech company. I'll go do my thing. I'll go be a libertarian and live on a seasteading island somewhere in the ocean and just watch the world burn. Like,
and not isolating.
yeah,
Not
we tend to
isolating.
isolate. We tend to go, all right, fine, I'll go off the grid.
Or
all that.
assume that being ignored means that we can ignore everybody else. And I
Right.
think the other thing is that it's when I learned that Gen X is a winner take all generation, which is like some of us are going to do really well and some of us are going to do really poorly.
Yeah.
And it's a bit dog eat dog. Uh, the thing that came up for me with Gen Xers is that there's a percentage of us that feel very disempowered. Things did
Mm.
not go the way that we had hoped they would go.
Yeah.
As opposed to generations after us that believed that we were promised something. We didn't think we were promised anything.
Yeah.
We just thought that there was a track.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
or it went exactly how we expected it to go.
or yeah.
I had a negative view when I was younger, and
Yeah.
what did I expect? It
What
did
did I
exactly what I
expect?
expected to go. I think a lot of
Exactly.
Gen Xers there too.
And
Right.
so there's like a disempowered feeling, but we're also a feisty generation at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, I think a lot of, not all of them, but like that concept of like the middle-aged woman who's like, like
Mhm.
barking at the boys, skateboarding or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to attend to whatever feels disempowered inside of us.
Yeah.
We need to attend to the thing that makes us feel like shrugging and giving up. And I guess that's everybody else's problem. Like if we can address some of that stuff, because what ends up happening is our generation overcompensates by just being like gruff and aggressive and you know what I mean? Like unfriendly and
Yeah.
just like whatever. Kind of the older person version of whatever we were when we were teenagers, the slackers.
Right.
That even though we weren't slackers.
Right.
Yeah.
But like whatever that is, I think we need to like get some of that because it's what's underneath it isn't actually anger. I think it's hurt.
Yeah.
I think Gen Xers are very hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can attend to some of that wounding, like maybe heal some of that hurt,
Yeah.
I think we can bring that feistiness and that practicality with a bit of personal empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is the cocktail of a lot of leadership. So I think maybe doing like preparing ourselves for this time period that's going to ask a lot of us too, by not feeling like everybody like, well, why should I do that? Everybody's going to ignore it if I do it anyway.
Right.
Like if I okay, say I step up and help a bunch of people, nobody's going to care. I'm not going to get any fanfare. Nobody's going to nobody's going to appreciate it.
Right.
Like we kind of have to get over
Yeah.
that part.
Yeah. Getting over that's interesting. I thought it was funny that I almost glossed over Gen X and just ignored you guys.
Right. Christian, we're used to it, man. We're like, we don't need to talk about Gen X.
We already talked about
Basically,
that.
we talked about boomers.
We
right?
already
So
kinda
we
did the
basically
clip.
covered them.
Yeah,
we did
we
the
basically
cliff.
covered
We
them.
did the cliff
Yeah.
notes. No big deal.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, it's just,
We get the idea.
we understand, Christian. This is how
Yeah.
we do
Yeah.
our lives.
Wounded
Par for the
and
course.
wounded and gruff. Okay, we get it. No, but
What do you do with them?
it makes me
Just isolate them and manage them.
it makes me think of there's this I've been into wrestling the last few years. Like I watched it a lot when I was a kid, and I just like kind of got into it.
I was just imagining, like, I've been in wrestling.
I've
Like, I
been
just
in
like
a
body
re-
slamming
yeah,
people.
Well,
and-
that would be a lot of fun actually. But there is this documentary series on Apple TV Plus called Monster Factory.
yeah.
And it's this Gen Xer who was wanting to be a wrestler who basically got his career cut short for like a back injury or something like that. And he took over this wrestling academy and turned his hurt essentially into his motivation for helping young wrestlers to get into the major companies, to get through the indies, like to do all the gritty, gruff stuff. And he's like a tough dude. He's pushing everyone through. But throughout it, he's talking about like, it's essentially like, I can't do it anymore. And I literally can't. And it doesn't, like, his core is like, I don't want people to get hurt because I
Yeah.
don't want them to experience what I experienced. And Gen X, like the relationship to Gen X and their kids is like, I don't want my kids to have the same upbringing that I had. I don't want them to be without stuff or to be without attention or to have to push harder than they absolutely need to. Like that's what we naturally try to pass down. And I think there is sometimes a parent-child relationship, but sometimes it's a mentor-mentee relationship of, look, we had it tough, but it doesn't always have to be that tough. And I think that's part of the letting go is like not just telling people deal with it yourself and tough it out. There's the purpose to that, but not all the time in terms of perpetuating your own abandonment.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And let me see if this lands with you as you're older millennial, but let me
Yeah.
tune into this from my standpoint as a leader, like as wanting to be a leader and helping maybe the next generation of millennials.
Yeah.
Guidance, leadership, and all that. I'm noticing that my direct command and control style of like, all right, we're going to do this and everybody, you're going to do that. You're going to do that. You're going to like, I mean, millennials can rise to that.
Mhm.
It's worked, but I've noticed that like, if I can bring like a cohort of millennials together and then focus them as a group onto a project, like we have a problem. We did this past week, like a couple of days ago, I brought a bunch of people together, like mostly millennials, except for you and me, right, Antonia? Everybody's at least a millennial. We're brainstorming some of the ideas for problem solving some of the issues at Personality Hacker and some of the ways we want to go. Like both problem solving, like just logistical things of like some of the programs we want to do, more live podcasts, like maybe a membership program, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I noticed like bringing the energies together and then kind of keeping focused. It's like the collaboration starts to unlock.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like millennials want to work together to solve problems.
Yeah, you guys love that.
Yeah, we do.
From a leadership standpoint, is that resonating?
Especially
is that kind of what
when it clicks in like gratitude and contribution? When there's
what
something
you want?
that's when it's something that I feel very aligned with.
Yeah.
When it's something I really care about, when it's something that I feel like not only I can contribute to in terms of like my actual skill set, what I've been thinking about, what's interesting to me. That's the NT side. It's like what's interesting to me.
Yeah.
It really allows for me to click in, and it's almost like the motivation unlocks as a result of that.
Yeah.
If it's just generally or for myself, like it feels like the motivation's not quite there. And I can only speak to myself, but I've seen that in other millennials. It's like once they click into something and they click into like a place that they care about, or there's leadership, or there's a path or a value set, where there's just like something that we're doing, suddenly the motivation unlocks. Suddenly there's this like almost latent capacity that just awakens, and it's just like go forth and conquer kind of energy.
So then what's the like energetically, if we're speaking to Gen Xers now that want to step into more leadership, is it focus on inspiration, focus on like function and specifics, focus on coalition? Like how, I mean, there's all these things are important, but if we had to like speak to Gen X leadership and say, here's the type of energy you want to lean more into.
Right.
I think I heard in what you said, inspiration is important. They need to feel inspired towards something bigger than themselves.
It's kind of like with the boomers needing to grow almost like their collective introverted intuition. I think Gen X needs to grow their introverted feeling.
Okay.
And it's less about what necessarily I want, though that's part of it. It's less about doing the extroverted thinking effectiveness stuff and more about like, why are we doing this stuff? What is the motivation? Like you're saying, motivation, inspiration, and connecting it to the practical, and connecting it to the visionary, connecting it to the potential of what we could do and it's not like doing grand speeches of like what we can be and stuff like that, but it's like,
well, I saw your motivation get unlocked in this meeting 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Like we're in there and I could see you like, as I'm talking and we're kind of idea generating, we got different people talking from all different perspectives. I could feel you coming online more and more like, well, you're already interested because you're there.
Yep.
But you're like, I could feel your heart activating. Like you care, like, you know, you always cared, but in like, it's like, this is important. Like you got really excited. You were lighting up. What was doing that? What was the energy that you were picking up on personally?
Well, I just went through Personality Life Path as a student.
Okay.
And through that, I connected with other students. There are people that I've been through programs with before as well. So I think without even realizing it, like there is the collective aspect of having gone through that
with other people,
and with other people I know, and I know, like, and trust, and work through my personal stuff. Still working through, but like work through the bulk of it. And I feel a greater sense of contribution of like wanting to get people through that to help them find their sense of purpose and focus. I think also through the guidance of you guys, especially you, Joel, like really bringing your personal motivations into what you're doing here has allowed me to think about my personal motivations. Like there's a sense of authority challenge that a lot of millennials have with self-authority. And I think Gen Xers can really encourage that self-authority. I don't think Gen Xers have a problem with self-authority.
No.
No, that's why we're feisty.
Yeah. Like
And we don't
millennials
get along
have,
with each other. Like, no, it's my way.
Yeah.
there's this, again, I'm talking about that, like that
Yeah.
sensitivity and resilience. There's that dichotomy there of like really feeling like I need access to my own inner authority and motivation. And because that's so naturally embedded in Gen X, it's like, give us a little bit of that. What does that look like? What does that mean? Break that down, and some of it, sometimes it's intellectually, sometimes it's through motivation, and it's letting go of some of our traumas and letting go of those things that we don't need to cling to all the time as an identity, that our identity is bigger than that. And so for me, that feels like the path I'm working through, is that like my identity is not my trauma and my stories and those narratives that I'm clinging to try to almost like get someone to take care of me. But like I can step in, I can step up. And with our team, it's like I feel a sense of authority. I feel a sense of ownership of my role, which is like creativity, creative director, producing, bringing content to the table. I feel more connected to, like a self motivation, self-propelled, self.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a way to now unlock maybe some of the action steps for millennials? Like if we could talk about from a millennial perspective,
Yeah.
You probably have some heuristic you're using of what type of leadership you'll fall in with, or the type of groups of people you're like going to associate, either it's association or followership. It's both are in some ways, but how maybe that's the access point for millennials is like, I think a lot of millennials are like, who do I listen to?
Yeah.
And they default to mom and dad often, quite frankly, from my perspective, like whatever mom and dad's viewpoint is. And again, I'm not trying to offend millennials, but that's just what I see.
And sometimes carry out the values that
they're
the one-sided values of the boomers who are watching legacy media and carrying it down.
Yeah.
Or defaulting to politics and stuff like that. And not actually thinking about what are my individual values? What do I care about? And by proxy, what am I looking for in a leader and what they care about? I work with you guys because we're doing good work here. Like, it's not only just the skill development. Like I've taken the time to develop my own skills. I could do that. I don't need someone to just teach me skills. I need someone who is bringing like a bigger picture vision to the table that is actually like achievable, that is tangible, that brings it down to earth. Cause like there's almost too much abstraction and almost too much and with my fellow millennials and myself included. When you think about politics, you think about the big picture, you think about things like nuclear war or those big picture possibilities. It's too open. It's too big. It's too vague. Saving the world is like, what does that even mean? Even things like global warming. What does that actually tangibly mean? What are the systems effects of those things? Like, what are the projects that Gen Xers are leading or getting involved in that are a cog in the node of the system of those things that I can actually contribute to and be a part of? And millennials at scale, when the constellation alignment for them is like almost locking into what those values are and finding those Gen X leaders that are going to give them direction, give them purpose and skill build in the process to like galvanize is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah. And maybe peppering some life experience in there too, because Gen Xers are going to have, they're in midlife now. So there's a bunch of experience they have.
Millennials then, are there other avenues from your perspective, Antonia, maybe other avenues for millennials to lean more into their energy as far as how do you see, if you could offer from a Gen X perspective, you're looking at millennials. I mean, we talked about, I guess the thing I would encapsulate to say is if you're a millennial listening or watching right now, pick better leadership, like tune into better groups of people, tune into better, better's bad because it gives a qualitative. Just be judicious. Defaulting. Be judicious about who you are tuned into. And it could be mom and dad. It could be the person that you're like associated with now or where you're framed at right now. But I think, and maybe just tune into it at all. I mean, I guess the other thing I see is like, I'll go on YouTube and I'll see groups of people under the age of 23 kind of an environment like this, all sitting at like a giant couch situation.
Yeah.
No single person there has ever been married or has children in this environment. And they're talking like with authority, like how relationships and
Right.
like long-term relationships and like male-female dynamics work. And I'm like, you're all like, your brains haven't even stopped forming from like
Right.
a biological stance until 25. How do you've never been in a long-term relationship. How long
Right.
could it have been? You're 23. Like, I don't
Right.
understand how you could have.
It's like you're just reciting stuff from psychology books.
And I'm not being critical of it. I think that what I see in that is like, oh my God, what a bunch of people, like what an amazing group of people that are eager to share and collaborate and understand things and unpack things.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like if I were to come and say, hey, can I kind of be part of it and help give some, no, we don't want, like, I don't think this has ever been stated,
Yeah.
but it feels like, no, we don't want any bad old thinking here. We
Right.
want the fresher, better thinking because it's newer and we really know what's going on.
Right.
I don't think that's the message actually being given out, but that's the impression from somebody on the outside that looks at it, goes, okay, I don't think that's the leadership energy is not wanted here. They
Yeah.
want to be kind of left to figure it out on their own.
I see that.
And
too.
I know I'm broad brushing a lot here, but you get the point.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
My observation of millennials is, and this might even go back to the sort of the like a generational archetypal assumption that because the hero generation is waiting for the crisis, they're waiting for things to almost be like rubble, right? Like quote unquote destruction
Yeah.
is that's what they're designed to be strong as as a generation, as a heroic generation. They're designed to anticipate destruction and rise to the occasion in it
As a
And
collective.
as a collective, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's when the crisis hits that they know what their purpose was.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I see is in preparation for that and in preparation for like whatever's the old way to be complete and entering the new way, the crisis isn't quite here yet. So what I see is a lot of, the word is deconstruction. And you'll see this in a lot of faith, like people who are like leaving faith traditions or redefining their relationship to it. They talk about deconstructing things. I see this with also the concept of like what is normal, what is neurotypical versus neurodivergent, right? And they're deconstructing this idea of what like normal is,
Right.
And there's a deconstruction of like the relationship to faith. And deconstruction is not the same as destruction, but there's almost the sense that if I put it down to its components and I kind of like quote unquote destroy what was once there,
Yeah.
somehow purpose will arise from it. Somehow I'll understand. I'll have greater clarity. I'll know what the next piece is. And unfortunately, what I see is a lot of that. It almost feels like busy work to make lateral moves, right? It's like I deconstructed my faith, and now I'm in like one that's like I'm just as attached to.
You move into like a secular faith almost.
Yeah, and there's now a secular faith. Like, and what are the ready-made secular faiths for me, right? Like I'm out of my religion, but now I'm into like whatever is this, like this activist mind frame or this, like or whatever. It's like, and then I'm gonna act just as faithful to that as I did in my religion because I deconstructed it, and the deconstruction all by itself is supposed to tell me what clarity and what enlightenment is.
It was all about the energy all along, not the narrative. They deconstruct one narrative and pick up another because it's the energy they're connecting it to. The
Right.
energy that's carrying underneath it.
Right. And
Of the religious fervor or the buy-in or the whatever that
Bec-
they pushed away narratively. Well, I still feel that energy, so I'll grab another narrative and apply it to the same energy.
right,
Is
because
what I
the
hear you say.
heroic energy is still there. The heroic energy of being a part of something bigger and wanting to be strong for whatever's coming next and all that stuff. Like the fervor is still there.
Yep.
It's just now it's pointed in a slightly different direction. And when I hear you saying like be smart about who you're choosing next, right? Like be smart about what you're going to. I would also say be smart about not just making a bunch of lateral moves.
Yeah.
It's like, and like you said, it almost feels like in a desire to not have any of the old thinking. That's part of the deconstruction. In a desire to not have the old thinking, there's this sense of if it's fresh and new and nobody's been thinking it for as long as I've been aware of history, then it must be good. It must be the new way. And it's
Right.
like, there's a lot of problems in there
Oh.
too. You're just waiting for them to manifest.
Not just good, better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Not just good, but better than the old way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's better.
it's
And it's
better.
like, maybe, maybe it's better.
Right.
Or maybe there's just a bunch of problems waiting for you at the end of all of that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
one of the key components of integral theory, which is like spiral dynamics, Graves model, that kind of stuff, when you're moving through levels of development, it's the idea of transcend and include.
Right.
And what is
Yeah.
happening a lot is people are trying to deconstruct and they're trying to move into something else that feels like more of a new community that's being formed,
Mhm.
not around the old values, but kind of not realizing that religions and church and civility are areas of natural human development that
Mhm.
we need some aspects of it. We need to experience what like a church provides, for example, like community, communing like once a week at minimum together, having connection, talking about issues or challenges, or like contributing to the community, or experiencing a sense of awe and wonder, playing music together, artistic expression.
Are you
all
saying
of
meant for my membership pitch? Is that
a
what
little
you're
bit,
setting me
yeah.
up
I'm
for?
kind of doing that, but like that's actually what it
I'm
honestly
teasing, but
is
yeah.
attempting to provide.
Yeah.
Like we're doing that at our studio space. Like
Mhm.
it's not religious in its treatment and its decor, but it's an opportunity for people to show up on a regular cadence,
Yeah.
something that they can trust, that they can go to and have those conversations about something, or express themselves poetically or musically,
Mhm.
have a sense of awe and wonder, or like my wife gave like a creative sermon essentially
Mhm.
talking about creativity and expression, and she came alive, and she came from an evangelical background.
Mhm.
She's
Yeah.
the perfect example of this.
Mhm.
I came from more of an atheistic background, but she came through that. She just came alive on stage, and there is a certain sense of purpose that comes through being connected to that sort of community element. It's just now extracting and like you said, becoming aware
Mm.
of what you're trying to leave behind and what you're still getting by accident,
Mhm.
and almost starting to learn what are the core pieces of that and getting that on purpose instead.
Yeah, and that made me think of the next thing that I would recommend to millennials is maybe keep the scale a little smaller.
Mhm.
You talked about the Gen
Focus.
X that was like, and there's a swing that's broken out the playground. I'm gonna go fix it. I'm gonna pick up my tools and go. It's like there's the idea of having like a community, an art community that you're a part of.
Right.
Like you don't have to be part of this huge. I mean, I don't. I'm trying not to say it in a way that sounds offensive, but like important conversation, activist cause,
Right.
which is part of this big abstraction of something
Mhm.
where like states are in battle with each other and like
It's a vague thing you can't personally do a lot of things about.
and there's
You get
no
upset about
metrics
it.
to
You
hit.
get upset about it.
Which I think is the point of it already.
Yeah,
You're
and-
whipped up.
It gets everybody whipped up, and it's like and like I can't visit this state because there's a governor of the state that I don't like, and that means that this thing, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, hang tight. Maybe there's something that you can apply that energy to that isn't about a bunch of states fighting that you don't even live in. So why do you even care?
Right.
Like, what's going on in your community?
Yeah.
What's happening? Like, is there a way to build some of that coalition?
How can we get together and rebuild a park?
You
Yeah.
got it. Exactly. Is there maybe a way to where like quote unquote saving the world, which is a terrible, terrible piece of propaganda that millennials were
Mhm.
raised with,
Mm-hmm.
which they are very reluctant to let go of because
Well intended, not bad.
Well-intended.
Like it's not a bad message, right?
well, it's an archetypal energy of the entire
Mm-hmm.
generation. You're supposed to think it's your job to save the world because
Yeah.
some crisis is coming and you're going to have to be there for it.
Yep.
And instead of just feeling that sense and getting agitated and wanting to keep the scope super big, can you bring it down to go, well, maybe saving the world is actually like saving this one experience for this one person.
Right.
Right? Like what is save a life, save the whole world? It's like,
Yep.
and what is saving a life? Is it like just preventing death?
Yep.
Or is it like saving the quality of somebody's life as well?
Right.
So can things be brought to a smaller scope and scale so that you can be a part of the action, feel the results, feel like that you're fulfilling your archetypal missive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's actually preparation for the crisis.
I think we feel that. I think we feel that with a lot of our students that come through. There's this like eagerness to contribute. It's like I found my people. I found my place. I found where I want to be, or at least the energy I want to be in.
Right.
And it's like, how can I stay a part of this?
Mhm.
And there's this like continued fervor to like keep a part of this. And a lot of millennials, I think, we're searching for something to attach to.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So Gen Z is coming right behind millennials.
Yeah.
And these are my children, most likely. They're going to identify with this cohort. I think a lot of their lives are, I think they were introduced to a digital world before they were introduced to an analog world in some ways.
Yeah.
Like they've kind of framed in a digital way, and it's probably only gonna get more like that.
Right.
I feel like there's a bifurcation
Mm.
as well, because I feel like they're one extreme or the other. They're kind of like real compliant and bought in, or real rebellious and almost kind of like my generation. It probably depends on which parents raised them.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Right,
Whether it was
right.
like millennial parents versus Gen X parents. Probably
Right.
Gen X parents raised more
Right.
countercultural, damn the man, go against the system, grind against the system kind of energy.
I
My
also-
children are more like that.
Yeah. I think as you're talking, it's clicking to me. We were talking during Personality Life Path. There's a survival strategy that came up. I think the theme of this one was survival strategies, and
Yeah.
a lot of millennials are working through that. And a lot of Gen Z, I think, are going to have to be reckoning with their own later in their life. And I think a lot of it is the autonomy strategy, survival strategy, which is they're overprotected. They don't have autonomy. And when you're experiencing autonomy, a lack of autonomy, you sort of result to two strategies. Either you submit or you rebel.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're seeing
There you
is
go.
there's this sort of, do I submit to it or do I rebel against it? But there's still an attachment to it, right? It's like being anti-religious or anti-whatever. It still has you. And I think
Yeah.
either way, that autonomy survival strategy is what's clicking for me.
Well, and they're not just overprotected. People do things to children right now in their own best interest,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually in the parents' own best interest.
Right.
But they're doing them to their children.
Right.
And their children are compliant enough to go along with it.
Right.
Whether or not that's actually the right option or choice for them long term.
Right.
And I see this all over the place.
And it's like Gen Z or the iGen or the Homelanders are this generation that gets the complete trickle down effect from everybody's stuff. They get the cultural messages that get down to millennials who are perpetuating their parents' stuff because they don't have a place to put their energy. And then like sometimes some of the Gen X angst a little bit. Like it's just this mixture of not really knowing what to do. So there's almost like a shutdown energy a little bit. They don't have like the Homelanders and the artists, the silent generation, were basically being raised to be compliant so that when the generations align and we go through the crisis and we rebuild the institutions, they fill those institutions.
Right.
They are going to be compliant to whatever the values are. And then in the next saculum, when we get to the next awakening and we start rebelling against those, the silent the Gen Zs in the next 40 years are suddenly going to be like, why was I compliant all that time? Things are starting to change. And still they kind of become compliant to the fact that things are changing. So there's this continued sort of polite generation compliance aspect to them. So they're too young to really be listening to this. But I think as parents, I think there's obviously the benefit to us for them to step aside and be compliant, because if we have to do things, like they can't be in our grill all the time. That's the challenge. But I think similar to what we were talking about in the previous podcast episodes we did around this, it's like making sure that we're like expressing our gratitude for like not spoiling them in a negative way, but like, you know, our kids are giving us the time to do this, you know, and it's like pay it, you know, reciprocity.
Well, and while this is like a general statement to all parents and all children of all generations and all time periods, try not to put too much of your stuff on them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that's just a general good parenting principle.
Like be aware of how much you're talking about politics around your kids.
You got it.
Or stuff like that.
Or how much you're talking about crisis, or how much you're talking about like, you know, how the government's out to get us, or how much you're talking about how all these people are terrible, horrible because they don't believe our same political persuasion, right? Like divide. Like be careful not to impregnate your children with divisive thinking that is not going to serve them when we're all going to have to make the sacrifices we're going to have to make pretty soon.
Yeah. They need to have a childhood. They need to play.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. Give them time.
And give them the room to be creative. And I think that's part of the artist generation moniker is art creativity comes out of restriction. Like you have specific parameters that you have to work within, or in this case, they're overprotected. And we believe that kids need to be out in the world and be bored that way. That's a different kind of boredom. But if you have like restrictions of like, I want to build a costume for myself and I only have what's in my house or in my room, then that breeds creativity as well. So I think that's just going to naturally occur through that generation. But it is like making sure that they're allowed to have that world, that they're allowed to create, that they have the tools, whether it's the iPad or or like pencils and pens and things like that, that they can really get not just an overprotected like waiting experience, but they can actually like build a skill and could express themselves and not completely dampen the light of their experience as a person in order to let their parents do the serious work.
Yeah. Okay. So summing this up, we talked about generational archetypes. There's basically 4 generational archetypes that cycle over and over again based on patterns we've seen. Again, this is a theory, a model that live through different seasons of time, 20-year seasons of time. And so a generation, a 20-year roughly cohort of a generation, usually will live through different parts of their life through different seasons of, conflict and all this. And I think of conflict too, as we're thinking about conflict, it really is the death and birth of a generational cycle, of a way of thinking, a way of being. It's the way like it dies off and then something out of that is reborn. Like I think at World War II, really what died off in World War II, it was the final nail in the coffin of colonialism. Like I think that is one thing it killed off. Like colonialism, this is what Winston Churchill was super panicked about. He was always trying to like mitigate. He knew he must have had like NI or something. He just knew it was coming. He knew colonial, and he was like freaking out. Like it's the worst thing ever. If England doesn't have our colonial center points around the world, it's going to be really bad. We need to have those. That's what he was fighting for.
Right.
That didn't work out. Right.
Well, and for
England
anybody who's
their,
gonna say it didn't end it, there's still colonies. It's like it ended the time period where that was expanding.
Yeah. Like Hong Kong was handed back. And
right.
Like
it's
other
like
India was like it.
Colonialism started receding and it continues to recede.
You can make arguments for all that, but in general, please don't get specific down to like every little possible disagreement. It's in general, though, it really did start the trajectory of colonialism not being, and the Civil War here in the United States ended the idea of slavery. And that took a long time for all the other things that slavery was associated with to work it and still working itself out, right? It's still having problems with it. So there's old ways of thinking that die and then new ways that are born at these total war conflict points. And so there's things that are going to die in the next one. Things will be reborn. That's really interesting. It's almost like if like culture was a life, it's like it dies and is reborn at a moment.
Right.
But we don't as people die. We're alive in both of them. So we have a different experience.
Right.
And so I think that's going to be very interesting to see what's coming for us. And I think we all know it's brewing. I mean, I don't think anybody can sit back and go, no, what are you talking about? There's no coming crisis brewing. Like whether they want to admit it or not, it's like 100% of people on the planet are like, I can feel, I can smell the wind. I can smell it in the air. And we know it's on its way.
And I think Neil Howe postulates about what the future could potentially look like, but is very, very specific about saying that these are patterns. It's not a prediction in terms of what's going to emerge. Like the new world, so to speak, is just, it's likely to be unrecognizable. Yeah. And I don't want to spend time, personally, I'm not going to speculate too much about what that means, but there are things happening in the next, I think Japan is doing another World's Fair in 2025.
There you go.
Like we're starting to think about that stuff a little bit. Yeah. And it's just interesting to have this in mind and pay attention to what the next decade's going to look like. And I highly recommend reading the book.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a couple different things here dates wise that are very fascinating that he brings up. He says that this season seems to be dilated. So winter is going to extend longer than the usual 20-25 years. His guess is somewhere around maybe 2032 ish, right?
Yeah.
So that's around the time period. Also, as far as like the generational dates, the reason why I also agree with you, what you said earlier, Joel, about how I would trust their generational date breakdowns more than anything in the media or census reporting. Because census reporting is just talking about time periods of births, whereas generational theory places generational timelines based on the occurrences that are happening in the world. So take, for example, 1924 was the cutoff for what you could call like the lost generation, right? The previous nomads. And then no, excuse me, that's not accurate. It was actually 1925 started the GI, and then
no, it didn't start the GI. Ended the GI. It started the
ended
artist.
the GI. 1924 ended the GI, and 1925 started the lost, which was artists. Thank you. My apologies.
So it went from hero to artist on the 24-25 split. Those 2 years, 1925-24.
The point of all of that, now that I've made it super confusing, is that 1924 was the last year of being qualified for conscription into World War II. So after that, you weren't drafted. 1925 was the first year that you were not going to be drafted for the War of World War II.
You were too young.
You were too young.
But we didn't know that till after the war, because it could have gone for 10 years.
You got
for
it.
4 or 5 years in American time.
And there was even, they quote people talking about how I was, this writer was born in 1925, and he remembers wanting to be drafted. He wanted to go to war for World War II, but it was like, sorry, you're just too young. And he's like, I could feel the difference of my generation, all the me and everybody who came after me versus people born in 1924 and before, who were conscripted. He's like, there was just a difference. It was like those people just would look at us and we just didn't know something they did, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how generational theory breaks down those time periods. And what's so interesting is that he says in the book, we might not actually know when the millennial generation ends until the crisis hits.
Yep.
So the millennial generation, like I've always thought that our oldest gunner, who's 17 at this time, obviously is going to be part of Gen Z, but it's entirely possible that Gunner could be one of the last of the millennials, depending upon what the crisis asks of that generation and what age bracket does it stop asking that level of sacrifice from the heroes. And so it's just it's like they have a different way of looking at it. The dates are different because of that. And in some ways I give it more weight.
You mean I have to put thinking into this and actually look at dates and numbers and I can't just be like, well, you're a Gen Z because you're young. I got to think about it.
Yeah. This idea that Gen Z started in 96, I'm like, who decided that? That doesn't make any sense at all. But
well, it's this humility to me that we're still on the leading edge of existing. Like we have all this history that led up to today, but like we're it, baby. Like we're defining what's coming. We're a part of what's happening. We're like, things are not going to stay the same way that they've always been. They haven't. And I think we feel that now more than ever.
Yeah.
And we're going to definitely experience that going forward. But it's like, that's what I mean about the meaning crisis. It's like, it's not sitting back and waiting for it to happen. Maybe that's my hero ethos coming out, but it's like, if you're paying attention naturally to where your energies are going, maybe paying attention to this podcast and some of the tips that we've been giving you, like when that constellation moment comes, like you're just going to launch into action and be part of the new world and be, I mean, frankly, a part of history one way or the other.
Yeah.
And like there's definitely like the exciting hero ethos part of me that's like, yeah, let's go, let's do this. And it's also like, there's going to be a lot of grief that needs to be felt. There's going to be a lot of complex emotions, but ultimately I think I feel humility that like, I get to be a part of this. And I think I could find gratitude in that.
So you don't think it's a curse? May you live in interesting times?
No. I'd rather be having interesting experiences and have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about.
So, and I think if I compare this with like the last saculum cycle, the 1920s and 30s, the nomads are inventing technology like radio. I mean, I don't know if a nomad invented it, but radio's coming on the scene, broadcast. Cinema had just been invented a little bit before that, but it was starting to come into its own sophistication, like with sound and color. And they were getting better and better at making movies. We had, again, radio in the early days of television and telephone was like, it started to take off. 1930s is when most of the United States was electrified.
Yep.
We went from an agrarian kind of, you went to sleep with the sun, and then you have electric lights, which plus radio, and you can hear news from all over, right? The whole world, you're getting updates of the news immediately. Like technology was just like brewing right before the crisis.
Right.
You could just feel it brewing underneath the surface. I could feel that here too. We've got WorldCoin, scanning the eyes with with the orb or whatever.
Oof.
And like this like digital world that's developing kind of on the blockchain and
Well,
all that with
you
like an
know,
analog world that we still live
You've
in.
got the privatization of space.
Yeah.
You've got solar. You've got
Yeah.
electrified.
Robot
we're
farming, like, stuff's
looking
coming.
at bigger scale.
Mhm.
Like, what does electric cars at scale look like? What
Yes.
does some of these other technologies look like at scale? That when the time comes to click in, like, what makes sense to implement?
Well, and like I mean the advancements of nuclear,
Mm-hmm.
right, as an energy source,
Yep.
and the idea of maybe making it like single cell, right? Like
Yeah.
like we run our
But-
houses off of little pack or
But, like,
whatever. It
Screw-
changes the game.
Screwing with biology, like it was about
Yep.
eugenics and like other things
Mhm.
back in the 30s, like
Right. That's true.
it was like
eugenics was
race and
huge.
eugenics and
Right.
screwing with biology. Now we have gain of function laboratories developing like bioweapons
Mhm.
Yeah.
that can infect people. Like,
And the idea of
If you-
messing with bodies to change their nature.
yeah, if you just kind of look at this, it's like, wow, there is a lot of pattern repeats.
Mhm.
Yep.
Like you could just see the if you just look and you
Yep.
compare notes, they're different subjects, but the energy is very similar.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's again why I think this theory makes sense to me. I'm an
Mhm.
intuitive. A lot of theories make sense to me, but it feels like it's rooted in
Mhm.
a pragmatic like view of history that
Yeah.
really took account of what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their work is great. And I would love to have Neil Howe come and be on the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
And
think we should
if
make
we
that
could ever
happen.
get that,
Mhm.
maybe we have to go to DC and find a way to get him closer to home. He may not come all the way up here, but I would love. I think he lives in DC, maybe New
Yeah.
York. I don't remember, but
Well, I appreciate you guys being willing to let me geek out about this on
Yeah.
camera and find that practical access point, because it, first of all, it makes my hero ethos
Yeah.
feel really good that like people are listening and they can calibrate something to it. And that's why I work with you guys to like really support that.
Yeah.
But you're both doing the work in the Gen X perspective to really step into leadership and figure out what that means, both tension muscles and release muscles.
Yep.
And I don't know. I'm very optimistic as a result of all of that.
Yeah,
Cool.
me too.
well, if you've been listening along or watching along, you have not been the fourth person in this 3-person conversation. It's been myself, Antonia, and Christian, but we do want to hear from you. If you come over to personalityhacker.com, directly below this episode, leave a comment, ask a question, more importantly, share your story. What perspectives are coming up for you? What is your generation? How do you see your generation's role in the world and the perspective of like, what do you think it is that you and your cohort are here to contribute? Where are some of the blind spots? Maybe you look at some of those other episodes we talked about last year. Christian brought a lot of this great thinking around generational shadow. Do you identify with some of that generational shadow inside of yourself or inside of your cohort of a generation or a constellation or however we're defining this? Come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, it helps us out a lot. We're also on YouTube, and you might be watching us right now as a video podcast. If you enjoy this episode, you can like, subscribe, and hit the bell to let you know when future episodes will be coming out. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it in all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And I highly recommend the next time our Personality Life Path program opens up. We've been talking a lot about it because it's like our favorite thing to do now, and it moves the needle for so many people. It changes lives, and I think it's about one of the best things we've ever put together. So the next time the Personality Life Path program opens up, we highly recommend that you give it serious consideration to invest in yourself and in your growth and development to become the kind of person that's going to be ready for the next crisis.
Yeah.
Right? Like, stretch out your hammies. It's going to get real, right? And,
Yeah.
and part of how you do that is to work on yourself. Now, the best way to know about the Personality Life Path program coming out is to go to personalityhacker.com, take our online assessment, and get signed up to our email list. If you do that, then you can know of all the cool things that are coming up, including live podcast opportunities. We do that all over the country. And Personality Life Path program, our profile training, all sorts of good stuff. You get to find out when you sign up to our email list. So I strongly recommend you do that and keep informed.
Yeah. Thanks, Christian, for being here today.
My absolute pleasure.
As a guest co-host.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is a good time. Thank
and,
you.
I would love to have you on more going forward. Maybe we'll get you down from New York and we'll do some more recording this fall.
I'll keep thinking about things.
Yeah, I'd love to have you on the show more. I think you really bring a great perspective, and I like talking with you. My name is Joel Mark Witt,
My name is Christian Rivera.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
and we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.
Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.